Beneath the dazzling blue waters of Kenya's northern coast lies the Lamu Archipelago, a cluster of islands celebrated for their vibrant Swahili culture, their ancient coral stone towns, and their bustling spice-scented marketplaces. But hidden beneath this postcard, beauty is a battle nearly erased from history. A battle not fought with grand armies or mighty navies, but with whispered defiance, crumbling treaties, and quiet, stubborn refusal. Centuries ago, as Arab merchants expanded their foothold on the East African coast, seeking fertile lands and trading outposts, they encountered a people who refused to be brushed aside. In the shadowed alleys of Lamu, Pate, and Manda, local African rulers, unsung kings and queens, whose names barely survive in brittle manuscripts, rose to defend their ancestral claims. They were outgunned, outfinanced, and outnumbered. Yet for generations, they resisted. Their story is a lost chapter of Africa's fight for sovereignty, one where victory was measured not in battles won, but in homes protected, traditions preserved, and identities fiercely guarded. This is their story. The tides around the Lamu Archipelago carried more than dhows and spices. They carried change, and with it, conflict. Long before European explorers drew shaky maps of Africa's coastlines, Arab traders from Oman, Yemen, and Persia sailed these waters. They came not only for trade, but also for settlement, seeking new lands to cultivate, control, and call their own. In places like Zanzibar and Mombasa, Arab communities grew rich and powerful, building stone houses and sprawling estates. But in Lamu, the situation was different. The islands had long been home to intricate African societies: Bajuni fishermen, Swahili-speaking farmers, small-scale chieftains whose power rested in community ties and intimate knowledge of land and sea. Their social order was subtle, decentralized, but deeply rooted. The land was sacred. Ownership wasn't a simple matter of money changing hands. It was tied to ancestors, spirits, and ancient obligations. To these islanders, selling land to outsiders was unthinkable. It was like selling a piece of their own soul. At first, relations between the newcomers and the locals were cautious but peaceful. Arab merchants built modest trading posts. Marriages were sometimes arranged. Shared Islam created bridges. Swahili, a syncretic language rich with Bantu and Arabic words, smoothed daily interactions. But as Arab settlers grew wealthier, their ambitions sharpened. Land meant control. Control meant influence. Demands started subtly. Requests for leases, for permanent trading rights, for partnerships that gradually edged local rulers out of authority. And when persuasion failed, pressure mounted. On the island of Pate, where mangrove swamps kissed the salt-bleached sands, a young African leader, known as Sheikh Fumo Bakari, rose to prominence. Fumo Bakari, descended from generations of coastal rulers, understood the stakes. He welcomed trade, but refused outright sale of any communal lands to Arab settlers. He knew that to surrender the soil was to surrender the people's future. Arab envoys, backed by wealthy merchant families from Oman and Yemen, offered him gold coins. Woven silks, carved ivory to sway him. He declined them all. When bribes failed, threats followed. Rumors swirled of dhows loaded with warriors anchored just beyond the reefs, ready to enforce Omani claims by force if necessary. But Fumo Bakari was not easily cowed. He called a council under the baobab trees, gathering clan elders and local imams, reminding them that stewardship of the land was a divine trust. He urged unity. He urged defiance. In secret, village militias prepared. Young men trained with spears and bows, and old women wove warning songs into their evening prayers. Every shell path and every tide pool was mapped in memory, ready for resistance. Tensions erupted one fateful season when an Arab merchant house attempted to build a fortified trading post without permission on the northern edge of Lamu Island. When workers arrived, they were met not with violence, but with a silent human wall. Dozens of local villagers standing shoulder to shoulder, blocking every path. When laborers returned with guards, the villagers stood firm. Women ululated, children banged drums, old men recited verses from the Quran, invoking justice. Faced with overwhelming, non-violent resistance, the settlers retreated for the moment, but the battle was far from over. Over the next decades, the struggle between Arab landowners and African rulers became a quiet war of attrition. Documents forged in distant courts claimed ownership of fields where islanders' ancestors were buried. Taxes were levied unfairly. When villages protested, their fishing rights were suspended, their markets closed. Some local rulers were tempted by compromise. They saw an easier path in collaboration, accepting titles and wealth in exchange for signing away communal lands. But others, like the daughter of a chief from Manda Island, Mwana, Madi carried the torch of resistance. Madi, raised on stories of spirits guarding the coconut groves and ancestors sleeping beneath the tamarind trees, refused all offers. When Omani officials demanded tribute, she sent baskets of withered mangoes. When they threatened her family, she summoned the village women to curse the shoreline at low tide, weaving rituals of protection older than Islam itself. The settlers called her a witch. The islanders called her a queen. Mwana. Leadership inspired neighboring villages. They revived ancient festivals outlawed by settler-appointed imams. They told stories under the stars of the great fish who guarded the archipelago, who would curse any foreigner daring to steal its shores. As whispers of rebellion spread, so too did repression. Some islanders were captured and sold into slavery. Others were exiled. But still, the islands did not fall. Time itself became their greatest weapon. Arab ambitions shifted elsewhere toward Zanzibar, toward Kilwa, where easier conquests lay. The Lamu Archipelago remained a thorn, a backwater of stubborn resistance. When Portuguese explorers later arrived, they would marvel at the oddity of Lamus hybrid culture Arab-looking cities ruled by African customs, African peoples fluent in Arabic, but fiercely independent. The locals knew the truth. Their resilience had been bought not with armies or treaties, but with quiet refusal. A refusal to sell the land. A refusal to forget who they were. Today, the white sands and coral stone alleys of Lamu whisper the old songs still. Visitors walk past the crumbling tombs of unnamed sultans, past baobab trees older than memory, past fishing villages where grandmothers tell stories of women who spoke to the tides and men who bled for the mangroves. But how many pause to wonder who truly shaped these islands? Whose silent resistance allowed this culture, this language, this spirit to survive? The next time you stand on an ancient shoreline, ask yourself what histories lie buried beneath your feet, and whose quiet, stubborn defiance made it possible for that story to endure. History belongs not to the conquerors, but to those who refuse to be erased. In dusty archives in Zanzibar and Oman, a few yellowing letters remain, complaints from Arab merchants frustrated by obstinate islanders who refused to respect rightful ownership. In colonial reports from the 19th century, British administrators remark in passing on the peculiar independence of Lamus African communities, noting how land ownership remains unsettled, despite centuries of outside influence. No grand monuments honor Fumo Bakari, Mwana Madi, or the countless nameless chiefs, elders, and villagers who held the islands fast. But in every Swahili song sung at a wedding, in every dhow crafted by calloused hands, in every prayer whispered, as fishermen set out at dawn, their resistance lives on. The Lamu Archipelago stands not merely as a jewel of the Indian Ocean, but as a testament, a living monument to those who chose to say no. And because they said no, they said yes to identity, to freedom, to the possibility of a future where their people would endure.